This week on Quadriga, the Queen in Germany. Don't mention the Brexit. Elizabeth II is on a state visit to Berlin. The British Queen is popular here, and many say the trip is supposed to remind Germany what's at stake in Britain's forthcoming referendum on EU membership. That's because British Prime Minister David Cameron hopes to get Germany on board for his plan to shift more power back to member states. Something he needs in order to back staying in the EU. But will the Queen's undoubted charm be enough to sway Germany's EU-centric political elite? Coming to you from Berlin, Quadriga, the international debate. Your host this week, Peter Craven.
Yes, hello and a very warm welcome to this latest edition of Quadriga, coming to you from Berlin, from here in Germany, the German capital. And we're focusing today on Queen Elizabeth's visit to Germany, which obviously comes at a time when her country, the United Kingdom, is edging ever closer to a crucial referendum on the possible Brexit, in or out in Europe. It's fascinating stuff, and to discuss it all, I'm joined by three expert observers here in the studio. I'd like to introduce them without any further ado. Beginning with Ulrike Herrmann, who is an author and a journalist with the Berlin-based daily, the Tageszeitung, also known as the Taz. She says quite simply, let the British go. We're also joined by Johannes Leithäuser, who writes for the FATS newspaper, that's the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, where he was also London correspondent for 5 years, until quite recently, in fact. And on the Queen's visit, he says, welcome home. The royals are Germans anyway. And on the EU, Johannes says, I would like to keep them in, but there's a real danger of Britain leaving. And also a warm welcome goes to David Charter, the Berlin correspondent of the Times of London, who's published 2 books on Britain's future. In Europe or Out is the name of one of them. British EU membership makes sense, says David, but there are drawbacks in terms of democracy and sovereignty that need to be addressed. Ulrike Herrmann, I would like to begin with you as somebody who works for what I think it's fair to say is a left-of-centre newspaper, of course, and you've got quite a radical opinion about the British in Europe. We've heard that already. Let them go, you say. What about the Queen?
Well, apparently the Queen is not of my opinion, but because it became quite clear, despite the fact that she's not allowed to voice clear opinions, that she thinks that Britain should stay in the EU because she talked about our continent and talked a lot about the common history of this continent where Britain always belonged to. So it's obvious that she thinks that the referendum should be voted with a yes for Europe.
David is nodding. That comment, that specific comment, our continent, was very, very important. Before we talk about it and before we go to David, let's just listen to those 2 comments from Germany's federal president and from Queen Elizabeth.
Großbritannien ist ein Teil Europas.
Great Britain is part of Europe, and the European Union needs Great Britain. A unified Europe and a strong EU signifies stability, peace and freedom for all of us.
We know that division in Europe is dangerous and that we must guard against it in the West as well as in the east of our continent. That remains a common endeavour.
Applause there at that royal banquet yesterday in Berlin. What do you make of it all? It's being viewed as a political intervention, and that's something, it's almost unprecedented.
I think it is fair to say that the Queen has stepped into a political zone with this speech at the banquet. It's not unusual that she makes reference to the general political situation. You can read those remarks as perhaps a warning for Europe to stick together in the face of a Russian threat, for example, or other threats, and to perhaps do their best for migrants, for example. However, it's inescapable that the context of this speech was the British renegotiation for ahead of a referendum which David Cameron is launching at the latest European Council. And let's be honest, the Queen has not, in this case, has come to the help of her government.
Do you think it was? I mean, do you think she spoke to Cameron before, or her people spoke to Cameron beforehand, and that they had a joint strategy on this?
I'm certain that there would have been some conferring on exactly what to say. And, of course, quite unusually for a banquet given for the Queen, the Prime Minister was also there.
Yeah.
Now, this this was because he was invited by President Gauck, of course. But how did that invitation come about? It's very important for David Cameron to use every opportunity, including this royal visit, to cosy up to Angela Merkel because he wants her help to stay in the European Union.
What do you say, Johannes? Do you agree with that interpretation?
Well, I think these are very stormy times for the United Kingdom at the moment. There has been a crisis before and a referendum before last year when Scotland was asked whether it would leave the Union. And I think this question presents itself again now in a different way, because were Britain voting for a no vote to continue its membership in the European Union, the Scottish would then try to have a second referendum because they would want to stay in Europe. So the Queen, I think she sees her United Kingdom in some danger, and that's clearly a motivation for her to pursue this. And I think the hints were fairly clear in this speech against divisions in West and East, she said. And there are other divisions in the West. The Catalan people want to be independent from Spain, but I don't think she was drawing on these. But I think she aimed at Great Britain and the Brexit.
You're nodding, David Charter.
Yes, I mean, of course, there's the North-South division in her own kingdom, which you were referring to, not quite West and East, but I think you're absolutely right. The Queen was privately delighted that the Scottish voted not for independence and to stay in the United Kingdom. Not least because many of her properties lie north of the border and she very much enjoys visiting Balmoral.
One German publication, Spiegel, which is quite an influential publication, weekly news magazine here in Germany, before the visit said that described the Queen as the emotional centre of an insecure country. Is that a fair comment, talking about the UK?
Yes, it's not a bad comment in this day and age because the raison d'etre of the Queen and the reason why there isn't a Republican movement to speak of in Britain is because of her character, the way she's comported herself as Queen in a very stable, quite apolitical way throughout her time. And simply by the fact of being there and avoiding most of the day-to-day controversies of public and political life, has only added to the support for her. The real questions about this strange anachronism of one family being the ultimate power in the land will have to be faced only when the Queen is no longer with us, and they will emerge then.
But I think it's not only about her; it's about the institution, about the monarchy. When you look at these ceremonies or events that are taking place, for instance, a royal baby arriving or a royal wedding, the whole country is up. I've been in London when they held these street parties and many things were going on. And that was not just a tabloid show. It was the nation reassuring itself what it is about and what's in the core of the whole thing. And I was fairly impressed of that. And I think even if Prince Charles is seen sometimes as a bit of a funny guy, I think he will pursue and will carry this on.
Look, it's part of the glue of the nation. It's what makes us British. And we are allowed to have a little bit of fun at our own traditions, aren't we? I mean, there weren't that many street parties when President Gauck was chosen, I don't think, even though he was a good choice.
There's never a lot of flag waving when President Gauck is around, and there's always a lot of flag waving when the Queen is around, yeah? Let's just pick up on this point about the glue of the nation. We've got a report, and the glue of the nation is positive. An ancient anachronism, as you called it, is not quite so positive. We've got a report, a take on, an appraisal of the Queen's role in British society. We want to show this to you, first of all, before continuing the discussion. Here we go.
For centuries, the British kings and queens have succeeded one another with, it seems, no democratic legitimacy. They are also the heads of the Anglican Church, so Catholics are barred from taking the throne. Most estimates agree that the royal family costs British taxpayers well over 40 million euros a year, making it the most expensive monarchy in Europe. It's a lot of money for pomp and circumstance at a time when Britain's Conservative government, under David Cameron, is pushing through deep cuts in public spending. The Queen is at the center of what some view as an antiquated personality cult. According to royal protocol, she's not to be touched, and selfies with Her Majesty, forget about it. In the modern world, is the royal family an expensive anachronism?
An expensive anachronism or an antiquated personality cult? What do you say, Ulrika?
Well, the truth is that many Germans would love to have a monarchy themselves, and because we don't have a monarchy, we all love Queen Elizabeth. But I think when it comes to Britain, you really have to see that it's more than just a person. What she really stabilizes is a class society. I mean, the aristocracy in Britain has never been removed, and there are very strong differences between those upper classes to which, for example, Cameron belongs as well, and the lower classes. And you have institutions like Eton, which makes very sure that once you're at Eton, and of course you can only get into Eton if you are come from a very wealthy family, then you go straight on to Cambridge or to Oxford. And the same applies to almost all public schools. And of course, to enter a public school, you must be from the upper middle classes at least. So the Queen represents a system that is still, in many ways, straight out of the 18th century.
It's interesting, isn't it, that here in Germany, when the people living here in Germany who have German citizenship are citizens, and people, like this man on my left, when you look in your passport, you're a subject of the Queen. How much of a difference is that? Is that reflected in this analysis that we were just hearing from Ulrika?
I actually don't think it makes a great deal of difference in my day-to-day life at all. I mean, it's true what I said earlier, that it does seem a bit of a historical anachronism, but it is our history, and the British are rather proud of the fact that they've never had a violent and bloody revolution where half of the population has turned on the other half. Yes, there have been upheavals, as there have been in every society, and the monarchy would be called into question again were it to throw up a monarch who behaved in a very disreputable or unhelpful way, and that would be the end of it in the modern world. But it's the character of the Queen has sustained this rather strange anachronism
over 5 decades.
Yeah, and not only her. Generations and generations of monarchs before in Britain have done so. I mean, we might still have Hohenzollern being the head of our state, were Kaiser Wilhelm and his predecessors not behaving as they did, and would have given up their power sometime in the 19th century, which they didn't. So it was their fault in a way that we lost them now. And this happened in Britain many centuries or decades before. But I would say that still there's a big difference in the concept of democracy when you look between the subjects in the United Kingdom and the citizens in Germany. The first line of our written constitution says all the power stems from the people. There's no written constitution in the UK, and the sovereignty is just deducted from the Crown to Parliament. Of course, Parliament is elected by the people, but the mechanism where it comes from is from the top down, and we are more bottom up now.
That's interesting. I mean, you're a very keen observer of, given what you've said, which is accentuating the differences between the two political cultures. We've seen that David Cameron has been in Berlin as well. To what extent, when we see Cameron and Merkel negotiating in advance of the Brexit, the possible Brexit or the possible referendum, to what extent can the UK and Germany be natural allies?
I think when you look at the policy they pursue, especially the two, there are big similarities, and I think that's one of the reasons Merkel, to some extent, would want to help Cameron to get this done and to keep the British in the European Union. There's this saying by Germans, say, don't leave us alone with the French, you English, you see, better stay in. But in general, I think there's a misconception because we are now, since in the post-war periods, we have learned to be a consensus society, and we're good in doing compromises and keep everyone in and happy. And I think the British political system is far more confrontative, and I think that leads to different strategies and may make a difference in the end here as well.
But we don't have the consensus approach from this lady, Ulrike Herrmann. You said let them go. You are clearly among the people here in Germany. There are many in Brussels politics that I've spoken to behind the scenes who have said the same thing. Let the British go. There's a very high level of irritation. It's often said they come reluctantly to the party and they complain about the music and leave early, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there is no reason why Britain should have the idea that they can rule Europe. And that's the idea they have. Either the whole of Europe complies with the ideas the British have about Europe, or they want to leave. And you cannot work with someone who is not able to do team play. They want to have a British dictatorship over Europe to be hard or blunt, and that doesn't work. And especially it doesn't work because the British are dependent on Europe. Europe does not depend on the British, but it's the other way around. Now, imagine what happens to the financial institutions of London if they were no longer part of Europe. Of course, they would do no business there anymore, but they would all move to Europe or to Luxembourg. I mean, the big British banks already announced that in the case of a Brexit, they would move to Europe. And that shows exactly where the power is. It's with the 27, now 28 member states of the EU. It's not with the British. They are just one nation of 28. And if they can't accept that, they must go.
The British are going to be lost and lonely, David.
Yes, I think it would be very hard for Britain to be completely separated from the continent which the Queen called our continent, although, of course, it was Churchill's original vision that he would be very happy, the British Commonwealth, empire as it then was, would be very happy.
The Commonwealth is gone.
Would be very happy, along with America and Russia, to see a United States of Europe, he said in his Strasbourg speech. But I have to say, in response to Ulrike, that really the British have brought a lot to the party. We've seen over the years that one of the great reforms of the European Union to bring the single market was driven through by the British Commissioner following orders from Margaret Thatcher in Downing Street. Amazing as it may seem, the huge development of majority voting in the European Union was pushed through by the British, and it really led to a huge growth in prosperity for all nations in Europe. So I think rather than being just one of 28 members, I think the British are right to feel that they deserve a little bit more respect for bringing some changes to the European project which have been beneficial. So,
and I mean, if you look at it from the other way, you have to envy or to admire them to a certain extent that they would dare to leave. They would say, okay, we could do this on our own. And yes, the Commonwealth is gone, as Ulrike said, but the English language has remained the world language, and that's still a kind of an empire left, because that's the basis for British entrepreneurship and investment and deals all over the world. And if you look at this focus from the London perspective, OK, maybe it will be bad for the banks, but we can still go to Dubai, Hong Kong, Australia, Canada, or elsewhere and do business there. So I think they are having a kind of self-esteem that's lacking in Germany, because we are always intimidated by globalization and all this kind of things. The British are not.
OK, and they could, says David, be the great motor for reform in the EU. That's a very interesting point. We've got a short clip now about what the British actually want, what they want from these negotiations that David Cameron is pressing for. Let's have a look at that, and then we'll continue on that point about the British perhaps being, the leaders in reform in the EU.
David Cameron wants the EU to be more transparent. Like many of his constituents, he says the Union has grown into a bureaucratic juggernaut, and citizens in many other parts of Europe feel the same. Many British are worried that the country will soon be overwhelmed by waves of refugees looking for work, a fear that also resonates in other member states. National lawmaking bodies increasingly have to give way to Brussels. British voices demanding the right to decide more for themselves have grown loud. Many other Europeans are also pushing to reduce the power of EU institutions. So are the British actually leading the way on reform in the EU?
It's a good question, isn't it? I mean, David Cameron could turn out to be the great British knight in shining armour who reforms the EU.
Well, I think that is a complete nonsense, to be honest, because what he will be doing is to disintegrate the EU. That's the aim. That things that have been agreed on are to be reformed again. And it will not stop there. If you somehow give the British now some success in their blackmailing game, then they will start again. They will never, ever stop again. It will always be either you give us this and this or we leave. So there must be, for one and ever, quite clear that this kind of blackmail will not work.
But they have had these exemptions before, and we have lived with it. I mean,
what happens now? They have the referendum.
Yeah, but I want my money back, said Margaret Thatcher 30 years ago, and she got her money back.
And you have a referendum, so it doesn't help to give them anything, because they will just start negotiating again.
This, of course, is an example of exactly how Britain comes to leave the European Union, because of the lines drawn in the sand by the supporters of United States of Europe, which is a very old-fashioned idea, which is completely dead in the water. And there are very few politicians left in office anywhere in Europe who would want the kind of centralisation and diktat from Brussels, which the Cameron government is quite rightly questioning. And let's try, I think, and look at this from the other end of the telescope and see that when Britain says it's only fair that the countries are not in the euro should have the right to question the countries who are in the euro, that is a valid rebalancing of the way that decisions are made in Europe to keep all those nations bound into this important union.
Yeah, but I think, and maybe that would be something that could be given away or granted. But I think if you look at the way Cameron is now challenging the union, that's not much about reform. That is about pleasing his public at home, and that's about muddling through. There's this big issue about migration and immigrants within the EU, where we have this freedom of movement. And obviously, the question is, at what point do people have the right to get public benefits when they move to another country? This question is arising in Germany as well as in the UK. We are not that aware of it. So he's clearly addressing something we are interested in as well. But the outcome would not be a reform, but just a muddling through and getting along.
Well, I think European politicians should be smart enough to take those pressures that are on Cameron and to use them to make the reforms that everybody agrees are needed, a much further deepening of the single market in services and digital, and try and increase this prosperity, which is woefully lacking in Europe. And when you look at it from a British perspective, we look at how does the Europe run its main project, the single currency. We see it being run in a very terrible way, and we think, well, we don't want to be run like that.
But you are not a member of the single currency.
That's why we're not a member.
I think the crucial point, just one question on ever closer union, that is still the principle of the European Union. That's what the British reject fundamentally. Can you live with ever closer union?
I think that the opposition is wrong. It's not about ever closer union, although I would be in favour of that. But what the British want is they want to undo the European Union that exists. And that is something we cannot tolerate. It is just not true that Cameron is proposing a reform. He wants to somehow abolish the European Union.
Not at all. I mean, he sees this as work in progress. The world is developing at a very fast pace. New challenges arise. And the European Union badly needs an overhaul if it is to face the modern world.
But there is no overhaul coming from Cameron. He just wants to reduce measures that are already there. That's all there is.
I think this problem with ever closer union, that's a line in the treaties, and the British want to chuck it out. We wouldn't, because it is a historic commitment, and it takes different forms all the way. It's just the reminder that we have to adapt to new challenges and to be flexible. And I think we might be flexible enough for Britain.
OK, Liza, well, that's the question. We began with the Queen earlier in the show, and we're going to go back. I want to go back to the Queen. But she's been on 5 state visits to Germany. The next time she comes on a state visit, her longevity, I'm sure, will allow this to happen. Is the UK still going to be a member of the European Union, yes or no?
Yes,
Ulrika?
because the British will be afraid to leave.
Yeah? David?
Yes, because the British will reform the European Union into something we can believe in.
Maybe she's not allowed to come again when the Britons are out of the EU then.
OK, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, all 3 of my guests. I hope we've given you plenty of food for thought. Our topic has been, of course, the Queen in Berlin. Don't mention the Brexit. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And do get in touch with us with your views on Facebook, Twitter, or by mail, of course. Bye-bye for now, and tschüss.